Hi, everybody. Welcome to Biological Foundations chapter. So this is Biological Foundations Part 1. We need to talk about the actual biology behind what's going on inside of your brain and throughout your nervous system that helps you to think and feel and behave in psychology. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to ask a question. We're going to talk about action potentials, the nervous system, and then later on we'll talk about pleasure and the somatosensory cortex, probably in the second part of this video. So here's the question that I have. Which of the following communicates the fastest? A neuron, a fiber optic cable, or a normal telephone line cable? Now you should know that a neuron is a nerve cell, right? So when we talk about your nerves, those are the cells that your nerves are nerve cells, right? So those are the things that send the signals for different parts of your body and inside of your brain. So which one communicates fastest? It's not neurons. It's not neurons. Fiber optic cables are like going like the speed of light almost. So no, neurons aren't even as fast as normal telephone lines. So what am I talking about with like communicate fast? So I have kids. Kids have Legos. I've stepped on Legos before. Have you ever stepped on a Lego? It hurts. How does our brain know that my foot just stepped on a Lego? This is what we're discussing. There's a sensor in the foot, and then that pain message has got to get all the way up to my brain saying, I just stepped on a Lego and it hurts. Well, how fast does that go? It goes fast, don't get me wrong, but it's not like a normal telephone line. That's not what's going on. In fact, there's also not like this pain pod that gets picked up from the Lego, sucked into your foot, and then sent all the way up your leg, through your spine, and into your brain. That's not how that goes. There's not like this little pain pod that starts on the floor and ends up in my brain. That's not what happens. Okay, this isn't like that. It's not like that thing at the bank that sucks up the if you go through the drive-through in the bank, the little container, and it sucks it up and sends it. No, that's not how it goes. That's not how it goes. In fact, the cells, the neurons, those are the cells that transmit the information. They actually don't suck in a specific thing and send it all the way up to your brain at all. They work in a lot of different ways. So let's first talk about neurons. Let's talk about neurons. What you see down here are neurons. You see the A, B, C, D, E. Those are diagrams of neurons. I've got two of them here. Let's go through the different parts, and then let's talk about how they communicate inside of a neuron, inside of the neuron. So A is the part of the neuron called the soma. Just like any cell in your body, you have to have a nucleus in a neuron. It's a cell, okay? So you have a nucleus. It's in the soma. Soma means body, right? So that word's going to come up several times in psychology. But A is a soma. B is the thing that receives information from other neurons. It's called a dendrite. So B, those are dendrites. They're receiving things. Okay, now the long thing, D, that's when this particular cell is going to send a signal down it. It's going to go down that thing called the axon. So D is the axon. C is called the axon hillock. It is it's where the axon connects with the cell body, right? So C is just the location where the axon connects with the cell body. E, those little sausagey things that go along the axon, those are called Schwann cells. Schwann cells, they're not in all neurons, they're in most neurons, but not in all neurons. They actually help the information to go faster, help the message to go faster down the axon until, in fact, by down the axon, I mean it's going to go in the direction from the cell body to the end, right? The end, F, that region is called the terminal. And specifically on the end of each of those little finger things, those are called the terminal buttons. And those are important later on because those terminal buttons, those are going to have things that communicate with the next cells, dendrites, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what actually happens inside of the cell? So let's talk about inside of the cell. What happens inside of the cell to get an information from a dendrite all the way down the axon and then to the terminal button? We already know that there's not this little pain pod that gets sucked into a dendrite and sent all the way down the axon. That's not how it works. There is no such pain pod that does that. Instead, it works in a different way. So let's watch this video first, and then we will talk about what we just saw. So in that video, you saw how a neuron works, right? How information works from a neuron inside of what's going on in the neuron. And with that, remember we started talking about positives and negatives and charges and electricity. Let's think about this. What happens is that there is an electrical charge. Now you've seen batteries before, right? You know that batteries have a positive side and a negative side. Well, that's because there's going to be a flow of electricity. It includes positive and negative. Well, the same thing is kind of going on inside of your cell. There is a charge inside of the cell and outside of the cell. So what that means is that in general, when everything is normal, this is a negative, by the way, that I'm making right there. In general, the inside of the cell is negative compared to the outside of the cell, right? And when we create that little graph thing that they showed you on the video, that is just a graph of time and voltage or charge, right? Electrical charge. Okay, that's an H. It's a really bad H. Charge. Anyway, so that's the electrical charge on the y-axis there. So what this is saying is that somehow we got to get a message from the soma, right, from those dendrites receiving it, the B part, all the way down to the G. How do we do it? How do we get information to go from this side all the way down the axon up to the terminal and the terminal buttons? How is the information going to go? Well, it would make sense, wouldn't it, if we just suck something in and then we send it down, but that's not how it works. Instead, the things we need to talk about are the positive and the negative charge. What causes a positive charge and a negative charge? There's these things called ions. Now, if you've been in chemistry, you know what an ion is. It's just an atom that has either a positive or a negative charge. That's all we're talking about. So relative to outside, inside's got more of a negative charge. Okay? So that means that there is a bunch of positively charged atoms hanging out outside of the cell. A bunch of positively charged ions hanging out outside the cell. Okay. You would think that we would just suck in some of the positive ions and maybe that's the pain thing that gets that gets sent down the axon. But the answer is that's not how it goes. Remember, nothing's going to get sucked from one end to the other. Instead, we're going to see movement in a different way. And the analogy that I like to use is the wave, meaning like the wave at a football game or in a stadium, right? You've seen that, okay? Where people are sitting down and they go, whoa, and they stand up and then the next person stands up, etc. Well, this is what's going to happen with the positively charged ions inside of this cell. They're going to go into the cell and back out of the cell. They're not going to actually like get sucked in and move all the way down, right? In the same way that somebody at a football game doesn't actually get sucked into the wave and go all the way around the stadium. They just stand up and sit down, right? What's going to happen is the positively charged ion is just going to go in and then go out. So this positively charged ion is going to go in, and then a positively charged ion is going to go out. And that's what's going to cause the change. So when we look at this little thing right here, this is just the electrical charge, right? So you start at this resting potential is what it's called, right? And then over time, what happens is there's a signal that's received that says, hey, let the positive ions in, let them in, let them in, let them in. They all open up, right? But then they're told to go sit back down again. Okay? And you see the wave of electricity that happens. The resting potential is relatively negative, about negative 70 millivolts, right? That's normal for what's going on. But then this signal says, hey, let's start the wave. And start the wave means let's open up these little ion channels that allow positively charged ions to come in. But then it says, oh, push them back out again. And just like the wave, they go in, and then other ones actually go out, right? So the positive goes in, and then the positive is pushed out. And that creates a wave of electricity that goes all the way down the axon until we get to the terminal. Inhibition means that we're less likely to have this happen because these thresholds, these what we call action potentials, they like this, right? It's not like you turn on the hose and it leaves the ion channels open for a long, long time. It happens quick, like the wave, in and out, okay? And when that happens, it's going to happen like once, and then it's going to go through a refractory period, right? And then it's going to even out again. So what you see here is we actually build up the charge. So we're going to let some positive ions in, until we hit a specific threshold. That's going to say, open up the ion channels, start the wave, and then those ion channels stay open a little too long. You actually go a little more negative than normal. And this is called the refractory period, right? During this time, you cannot have a new, as the electricity is going down, right? Think of it like as people are sitting back in their seats, you can't have them stand up if they're sitting down at the same time. So you can't have a new signal sent while the absolute refractory period is going on. But then it's a little bit slightly more negative for just a brief period of time. That's this section right here. And when that happens, you actually can build up more charge and then have another action potential, another wave that goes on. Okay. What you need to understand is the idea that when we're talking about sending a signal inside of a neuron, now this is all just inside of the one neuron, that's all we're talking about right now. We're talking about electrical charge. And it's kind of like the wave with positively charged ions. Positively charged ions go into the cell, they go back out of the cell. Okay? Positive charge go in, part of positive charge goes back out. Now, technically, it's sodium going in and it's potassium going out. But just know that it's positive charge, creates this spike in the electricity inside of the cell, and then it goes back out again. They kick it back out again until it gets back to normal. That's what's happening inside of the cell. Inside of the cell to communicate from one end of the cell to the other. All right, let's keep going. So, review. Which part of the neuron contains its genetic code? That would be the soma, or the cell body, right? The soma is the cell body. That's where you have a nucleus, and where you have a nucleus, that's where you have genetic code. What part of the neuron receives signals from other neurons? That's the dendrite. A dendrite receives signals from other neurons, and the dendrite, then that's where we can build up the charge until we hit the threshold, start the waves, which is the action potential, and send it down the axon. All right. Now we need to talk about what happens when we get to the end. So this up at the top is a neuron. So this, I'm circling the cell body that has the dendrites around it, right? And that's the axon. It's sending it down. Okay, the wave is going to send it until it gets to the cell body. Now this little square right here, okay, that's the same as this. This is a blow up of that same thing. It's the magnified version of this. The area where one cell connects with another cell is called the synapse. The area where one cell is going to connect with another cell is called the synapse. So we've magnified it there, and then we're going to magnify it again right here. Okay, so these are all magnifications of each other. That's what you're seeing in this particular picture. So what you'll need to know is that at the very end of a terminal button, you've got these things called vesicles, and they have special things called neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters. Wow, it's hard to read. Anyway, it says neurotransmitters, okay? Neurotransmitters, and some neurotransmitters do different things depending on their function. So let's go ahead and watch this video, and then we'll talk about it. So in this video, you saw that the action potential, right, that wave electricity inside of the neuron, got to the very end. And then what happens? Well, in the very end of the neuron is the terminal button. Okay, that's what this is. And it's got these little water balloon things, right? And inside these water balloons, we have neurotransmitters. These are chemicals. Now, here's the analogy that we're going to use, all right? These chemicals are like a key, okay? These are like a key. And they are going to bind to a receptor. So see these little green, all these little green things inside of this neurotransmitter and this one, right? These are the ones we're talking about. Those are the neurotransmitters. Think of each one of those as kind of like a key. The receptor, is like a keyhole. Okay, the receptor, which is on the next neuron. Okay, remember this is the synapse that we're talking about. This region is called the synapse. So the presynaptic neuron is the one who's going to send the signal, and the postsynaptic neuron is the one who's going to receive a signal. So the neurotransmitter is like a key. The receptor is like a keyhole. So if you see right here, look, hey, this receptor is bound to the neurotransmitter is bound to the receptor. And what that did is it opened up a door, right? This door is called an ion channel. An ion channel. Now remember those ions? We have positively charged ions, we have negatively charged ions. So different ions are going to do different things depending on whatever's going on. Okay, but here's how this works. The axon signal, we did all that stuff, the action potential gets to the very end, and what that tells it to do is it says, all right, vesicle. The vesicle is like the pocket where the key lives, right? It says, okay, vesicle, release your key out into the synaptic cleft, the space between the two neurons. Go release it. And so that's what you see in this picture. That's what's going on right here. Okay? When those neurons are released in the synaptic cleft, some of them bind, like a key going to the keyhole, to a receptor. Well, keys open doors. What kind of doors are they opening? They're opening an ion channel. It's an ion door. Now remember, we were trying to build up the charge so we can get that action potential. So some neurotransmitters open up ion channels that allow in positively charged ions. And if these positively charged ions go into this cell, what's it going to do to the electrical charge? It's going to make it more positive. It's going to build up that electrical charge, and when that charge builds up, bang, it's going to send a new action potential in the postsynaptic cell, in this next receiving neuron, the next neuron over. So action potential goes down the axon, gets to the terminal button. It says, hey, vesicles, pockets, release your neurotransmitters, keys, into the synaptic cleft. Some of those neurotransmitters, keys, connect to the receptor, keyhole, which open up the door, ion channel, which allows in the ions. But when you open your door with a key, do you leave the key in the door, in the keyhole? No, you take it back out and you put it back in your pocket. So what happens is after these are done, they're actually going to go back into the cell that they came from. They're going to go back in a process that we call reuptake. Reuptake. After a neurotransmitter binds to the receptor, it goes back into a vesicle in a process we call reuptake. All right, just like a key opens a door, but afterwards you take it out of the keyhole, you put it back in your pocket. Same idea with a neurotransmitter. It's going to go back into the vesicle. Now, in reality, some of it get broken down, etc. But in general, the process of reuptake. Just like different keys open different doors, different neurotransmitters do different jobs. So let me give you some examples. Glutamate. Glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter. It does exactly what we just demonstrated. When it binds to the receptor, it allows positively charged ions in that builds up the charge and makes it more likely that the next neuron is going to have an action potential. We call it an excitatory neurotransmitter. Glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter because it excites. It makes it more likely that the next cell is going to have an action potential. There's another neuron that is very common called GABA, G-A-B-A, GABA. Okay? GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. Instead of allowing a bunch of positively charged ions to create an excitement, a positive charge, when GABA opens its door, it's going to make more negative charge and makes the next cell less likely to build up its charge and hit the action potential, hit the threshold before the action potential. So glutamate is excitatory, GABA is inhibitory. So glutamate's going to let in those positively charged ions. GABA's not going to do that. GABA's going to make it more negative, so that it's less likely to have an action potential. There's lots of other neurotransmitters. You've heard of them, maybe like dopamine, for example, or serotonin. Those we'll maybe discuss later on, but the basic idea of exciting or inhibiting, allowing in positively charged ions or negatively charged ions, glutamate, excitatory, GABA, inhibitory. Okay? Okay, let's move on. All of these cells put together create a system. All of these neurons put together create a system, a nervous system. So that video is just the video link that you see there is only it's a Schoolhouse Rock about the nervous system. So let's go ahead and talk about the different parts of the nervous system. So in your nervous system, you have the central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord. That is your central nervous system, right? And that's normally what we think about when we're talking about receiving or sending signals. But we also have other ones as well. The peripheral nervous system is the periphery, right? Away from that center, away from the brain and the spine, out into your limbs, for example. And they do other things. So the peripheral nervous system includes the autonomic and the somatic nervous systems. Remember, somatic means body. And so the somatic nervous system actually controls your body parts, right? Like your hands, fingers, etc. Autonomic sounds automatic, right? But it's involved with automatically allowing your parts to actually communicate and do the things that they need to do automatically, right? Not consciously. So somatic is when you consciously go out and reach things with your hands. You're using your somatic nervous system to do that. Autonomic is when we've got more automatic things. So for example, the sympathetic nervous system, have you ever gotten scared or frightened? And you're like, oh, and you have this fight or flight response that happens? Well, that's the sympathetic nervous system that is causing all that action to happen for you to panic a little bit and try and run away or whatever you're going to do, fight or flight. Once that happens, your body has to calm itself down. The parasympathetic nervous system is the one that helps it calm down after it has that fight or flight kind of response. All right, let's go ahead and end there.